Hello and welcome to Wide Angle, taking a look at India's foreign affairs. Recently, our focus has been on SAARC, and SAARC, as you know, is a kind of necklace around India. And now we take a look at a triangle which is emerging. In fact, just before the SAARC was barely over, the Prime Minister received a call, Prime Minister Narendra Modi received a call from the Prime Minister of China. And it was not just a hello, how do you do call, it lasted full 40 minutes. And before the telephone call, the Chinese Foreign Minister and others in the Foreign Office in Beijing had been in touch with India's ambassador there and saying how important Narendra Modi's Prime Ministership in India was going to be as far as the Chinese are concerned. To discuss all of this and take the journey forward, we have a very distinguished panel. On my extreme right is Zorawar Daulat Singh, a foreign affairs expert and who's a fellow at King's College London. Then we have Mohan Guruswamy, the Guru of Gurus, who is expert on Chinese affairs as on many other issues. Why don't we start with you? That what do you make of this, Zorawar? This call, 40-minute chat, jumping the queue ahead of anybody else. What does this indicate?
This was actually a demonstration by the new government, and especially the Prime Minister, that after a period of several years of, let's say, an apathetic India, an India that had sort of abdicated its role in South Asia, to sort of signal to the world that India is going to be the primary player and the shaper of events in this part of Southern Asia. So the move was intended to really draw in all of India's neighbors. It was not meant to be a Pakistan-centric event, and it's unfortunate that the Indian media kind of just picked on that and created too much of it.
Zorawar, that
right.
is it is in the nature of the beast.
Absolutely.
You have anybody there and Pakistan and the media goes. I suppose it would be different if the visit took place, say, in Chennai. I think the media in the south would then pick on Rajapakse. Exactly. And if it were in Kolkata, they would probably pick on Sheikh Hasina. Yeah. So therefore, it is a northern, it's an obsession, and I think while New Delhi happens to be the capital, we have to learn to live with it. Am I wrong?
Absolutely, you're right.
Now, Mohan, you have said, among other things, in fact, you've been very optimistic. You're saying a settlement with China is doable. Now, can you dilate on that?
I've been saying that for a long time. Matter of fact, the book which Zorawar and I wrote together elaborates on that. It points to the fact that some of our claims may not be entirely valid. Many of the Chinese claims are not valid. So between these two invalid claims, we can find a valid line, which means that we surrender claims. McMahon line and the McCartney-MacDonald line, which is in the Aksai Chin. These are possibilities. They are also realistic lines, lines which cannot be disturbed by militaries. So I think time has come to accept it and move along.
If we proceed a little more cautiously, slowly, even as we talk now, instead of going at final solutions, let's talk of the journey towards that solution. What do you see up to before we engage them?
I think first we've got to reset our domestic debate. We can't make this a parochial partisan business, which we have made. This whole concept of nation being land rather than people.
You're talking about Aksai Chin having no people.
Yeah, Aksai Chin. And we should look at what is in our interest and what we can hold and what we can't hold. And I think we've not had a real debate on it. All this has been used to score points against the ruling elite at any given time. People who are in the government today did the same thing to people who are in opposition today. And they will continue to reverse roles. And I think we need to get good common sense in between this. And to say that, there are things on which, bigger things in life, on which you got to move ahead. You can't let rancor and, obsession with old things dictate how this country is going to proceed.
Yeah.
Now, fact remains is that India, among all the antagonists of China, or people raised against China, India is the only country which has a border with China, where 500,000 men face each other on both sides with huge air forces and huge military power. The rest of it can talk. Japan has got a deep ditch in between. America is sitting at one end, away from the Pacific. And they can talk. But it is Chinese heads and Indian heads on the line. So therefore, our attitude must be different and not be dictated by externalities. Japan might want so many things, America might want so many things, but we must decide what India needs. I think India...
The Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, Zorawar, is quite well disposed to China on the face of it. The chemistry seems to be, the initial chemistry seems to have been good, because as Chief Minister, he made four visits to Beijing, and the last 2 visits, he in fact was invited and feted at the Great Hall of the People, and so all these things matter.
Absolutely. In fact, he's also made as many probably trips to Japan, and I'm told even Russia. So you're really looking at a regime that is going to look at Eurasia and Asia as a way to sort of manage your developmental and security challenges. Coming back to the border dispute, I just say that,
as I said, border dispute is a matter of detail.
Yeah. Right.
Let us proceed slowly towards a situation when the border, we are not, that is the final
In fact,
solution.
I was coming to that. Now we know the border dispute is something that ultimately will be solved when both sides feel geopolitically compelled to do so. And here, the interesting thing that I see on the Chinese side in the last year and a half is as their perceptions and threat perceptions on their entire periphery are changing, as the Asia Pacific is changing, as the United States and Japan are beginning to get serious on that part of the front, you're beginning to see a palpable effort by the senior Chinese leadership to engage India at all levels. In fact, since the Debsang incident last year in May, you've seen a systematic attempt to cool down the temperature on the border, cultivate new CBMs, and perhaps even a signaling that they might just be ready for a settlement. You have highest level rhetoric on the Chinese side saying we might be ready for a settlement. So that's what I find more interesting than maybe a few clauses here or there, where the Chinese side might just be ready again after 35 years. The last offer was made in 1979 to, ironically, Atal Bihari Vajpayee.
Yes.
And it was rejected at the time. It was reiterated in 1980-81.
The Chinese
that again was rejected.
Sorry, yes.
Right.
Complete your word. The Chinese use their words very carefully. And when they talk of a robust relationship, as opposed to a passionate relationship, what do they mean?
Look, China has got a set of problems which are unique to China. The problem of plenty of money sitting abroad. And that money earns nothing for them. And the dollar...
Because that money is locked up in US
reserves,
bonds.
In US reserves.
And reserves.
So that money sitting...
Where the
interest rate is between
is going to be negative.
0 to 0.5. Okay? And with the dollar depreciating at 4% a year, according to American policy, theoretically in 25 years all that is dust. Okay? So that reserves have to be put to work for the Chinese people. Because it is earnings of Chinese people taken on the sweat of Chinese working class and parked in America as surpluses. Now, China needs to put money where they can get returns. China has got another problem. It's an aging country. As of this year, its population is stabilized, which means that the aging process has begun in full swing. And by 2050, China will have a completely different demographic profile. So they need to get returns from their money. It's just like a pensioner sitting on...
So therefore, in other words, what you're saying is, while they are beginning to age, our demographic advantage is to 2060.
60, 70.
2060. So therefore, here's where
where you can invest,
should come.
where you can get returns. Now, Japan also has the same interest. Best thing is that it coincides
The
with...
Chinese have $3.7 trillion sitting
The
there.
Japanese have 1.2 trillion.
Yes.
Okay? So there's huge sum. These are the only guys with these kind of reserves.
With loose cash.
With loose cash. Japan also needs pension funds, to take care of old age. Now, India offers a great opportunity. India has a good credit risk. It's always repaid its debt. It's fiscally relatively well managed. And we have a government which is rode on the wave of optimism that you will have fast economic growth, you will create jobs for the 12 million new people who are entering the workforce every year, you will create expansion, you're going to provide for the biggest expansion of middle class in the history of the world. In the next 20 years, 180 million people will come into the middle class. So you've got to provide for them. For that, you need capital, you need a brand new infrastructure, you need then you've got to convert the Indian economy from a services-driven economy to an economy substantially driven by industry. Today, only 22% of our GDP comes from industry.
I mean, economics is my Achilles heel, Mohan. But even so, you are talking about Chinese investing in India, and Chinese are basically manufacturers. No. And if we have to get going, we have to get our manufacturing sector going.
But you can't get your manufacturing going unless you get your infrastructure going, unless there's electricity, unless you have ports, unless you have roads, unless you have railroads.
We have set a target. We'll come to that.
Yeah.
You're saying?
Just to link up to this and connect it with the trading relationship that with India and China. So we know that the corporate Indian sector is importing a lot of industrial equipment, which then builds up the domestic industrial base. But what's happening is it's producing large current account trade deficits with China, which accumulate to perhaps even up to $200 billion accumulated over the last decade.
Right.
Now, the idea for getting in FDI from China into certain select sectors carefully, provided the other facets of your policy are in place, is to reduce that trade imbalance with China and perhaps produce it. So what you could be importing is being made at home. But now it's easier said than done. Capital by itself does not translate into manufacturing growth, employment growth, or policy success. So you have to
what Mohan is saying is that here's this money lying. You need infrastructure.
India should be leveraging
You have set yourself a task of setting up 100 cities,
and
100 new cities.
And the important thing here is that there is a looming clash between China and Japan, and this is something we shouldn't get into. Right now, there's push in India from lobbies saying that Japan and China. Japan is actually a proxy for America, so that push is there. So you got to keep away from it. These two people they're fighting are like kabuki players, heavily made up, looking very fierce, and they are going at each other with wooden swords. We are like the audience. We got to watch it dispassionately and decide, who acted better, and we have to act in our own interest. So I don't see a Japan or China solution. I see a Japan and China solution.
But the Chinese, on the other hand, Mohan, they have very long memory. They have extremely long memory. You go lie down in your hotel and past midnight, when you have these late night shows, they're all about the comfort women, and they're all complaining against the Japanese.
But a lot of Chinese notions of their foresight. This is all a lot of exaggeration because they tend to be inscrutable, and though we ascribe a lot of meanings to that. Chinese problems are real and short term. You got to get that money out and working.
Before we get into how we get that money out, let us take a short break.